This is the justiceforveterans.uk One More Mission podcast. Welcome to One More Mission, which examines the developments surrounding the Northern Ireland Troubles Act, a piece of legislation that's becoming increasingly controversial, if not painful, for the government. We also take a closer look at the recent revelations about Keir Starmer's role in the Iraq investigations, as former parachute regiment Lieutenant Colonel Simon Barry shares his insights on the government's latest moves, the impact on veterans, and the ongoing legal battles that threaten to undermine justice for those who serve. Simon, there's certainly been plenty in the media recently. Where are we now?
Well, the government's committed line on demolishing the Legacy Act is continuing. No one really knows why. We hear all the various reasons trotted out, and all those reasons can easily be refuted. But they are hell-bent on doing it, and we may want to discover exactly why later on. The immediate effect of it is the remedial order which has gone through and seeks to address two areas where the Act was found to be in breach of human rights law. Well, it was only the opinion of one judge in one court, and yet the government is sort of setting that up as that whole thing is totally infallible, and it's not. The difficult thing is that they think that being able to allow civil action again and so on will bring some sort of closure. Well, actually, the whole principle behind Johnny Mercer's Legacy Act of 2023 is, and it was an imperfect solution to a really imperfect problem, is that you are never going to get a perfect solution to a problem like that, particularly, in Ireland, of all places which can have twists and turns all over it. What he came up with, and he has more than eloquently explained this to anyone who's prepared to listen to him, is something that was broadly acceptable to most sensible people as being the best thing in the art of the possible. Far from perfect, but far better than any of the other options. Of course, it doesn't sit well particularly with one part of the sort of constituency, if you like, and that is the people who were the problem in the first place, because they actually want something more from what this government is doing. They want, simply put, to have terrorists. And I find this really amazing, as a good Catholic myself, terrorists who killed more Catholics than the army and the RUC put together and then some, to be looked upon at the same moral standard as those people defending law and order. It just doesn't make sense. It's ludicrous. But that is what the remedial order will now start to enable, in that the well-oiled Sinn Féin machine with its various, great legal companies funded through the British taxpayer will now wind itself up and go for soldiers and policemen. And yet not much is happening on the other side. One, I think there is, frankly, a lack of will in the government to pursue some of these people. I think there's also guilt in the fact that it's a Labour government, Tony Blair, Jonathan Powell, and so on. And let's face it, Peter Mandelson was even in there at one stage of the game, that, people had pardons, they had comfort letters, they had amnesties and all that sort of stuff. And so it was a totally two-tier system from the beginning. And that is what it is going to develop into. It is going to make life very unpleasant for those of us who did our duty without fear or favour. And what is even more sickening is it's going to cost the British taxpayer even more hundreds of millions. Money that could arguably be better spent looking after veterans than going into lawyers' pockets.
Well, also money that would probably be better spent on rebuilding communities.
Well, your point is absolutely right. So what this does is it entrenches the division. So the whole thing about everyone being nice in Northern Ireland and taking the crown off things and changing the name of the police force and all that sort of thing is all done to try and remove the symbols of division and sectarianism. But the nationalist community, of whom Sinn Féin and the IRA were a front, And I don't believe that all nationalists are like this. I've met a few who will talk to you very quietly when no one's looking, but they are, under the cosh with the big boys with guns. You continue to push through this divisive sort of thing and encouraged by the Republic of Ireland. Do you really think that's going to aid the healing process? Certainly not. It's going to be pouring salt onto those wounds, opening up those divisions when at least no one's really been murdered for a few decades now, and maybe we want it to stay that way. But people aren't going to roll over having suffered the way that they have. And so you're absolutely right. The unintended consequence, or maybe they did work it out but didn't pay any attention, is that this plays into the hands of one particular party, one particular part of the sectarian problem in Northern Ireland, and therefore, by definition, is going to make life more difficult down that sectarian divide. So it isn't very clever from that point of view either.
These revived civil claims that are coming down the pike, a lot of people are talking about them as being lawfare. And some of the SAS groups have been calling it a lawyer's win. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, look at some of the more recent cases. Old men dragged to court in Belfast, repeated and repeated investigations and cases, all funded by the taxpayer. And if it doesn't work, well, prize every time, try once more. And it is wrong. It is morally wrong. And for the government in particular, the Armed Forces Minister, Al Khan, to come out and say, I've got you these 6 fantastic safeguards. Well, actually, Al, you haven't. You've got safeguards that are exactly the same as the terrorists are getting. So you've got our backs as much as you've got the terrorists' backs. And that's not good enough either. So this is a gravy train that the lawyers most certainly don't want to stop. And we've seen some very good examples of gravy train law against British soldiers over the last few days. And I think it becomes an industry that people want to do because they're greedy, but equally it is part of their ideology and it serves their long-term political purpose so to do, because they do not want in 20 years' time kids at school to think that the IRA was anything but a bunch of wonderful, crusading, nice guys who are being victimized by the filthy forces of the crown. And so that is the context. And I think we've got to be very careful to really keep those things in our minds.
In that context, you have the situation where basically through that lawfare, you're aiming to trade ECHR closure for exposure. It's either all for the victims' families or it's all for the veterans. It's not as simple as that. The arguments about preferential legacy treatment ignores the issue of the asymmetric nature of what we're dealing with.
Correct. And I think the first thing we all need to remember about the ECHR is the ECHR was pie in the sky during the whole of the Northern Ireland campaign. It is being applied retrospectively. The rules of engagement under which we operated and all the various mandatory legal instruments that were put in place for operations in Northern Ireland were put in place by a sovereign British government, answerable to the British people. Now what seems to be happening is retrospectively, the sort of government legal view is that the ultimate authority should not be anybody remotely answerable to the British people, but should be a bunch of unelected judges in Strasbourg from countries that probably don't have anything like the democratic tradition that we do. And once again, we are seeing profess trump justice. And I think that is extremely important.
You've now got the latest thing happening, which is the Starmer Iraq revelations. January 31 leaks show Starmer pushing mandatory Iraq probe as the Director of Public Prosecution. How does that hit troops facing 200 plus failed cases?
Well, once you get past the absolute ludicrousness and farce of the whole thing, all that money into a whole load of lawyers' pockets, and for what? People say Mandelson was Machiavellian and Jonathan Powell was Machiavellian. It is truly Machiavellian, and one must wonder why. To go slightly off the track on this, all this started in sort of 2004 4, 5, 6, 7, but 5, 6, 7 is really sort of picked up. And when Keir Starmer was so keen to go and mallet British soldiers that he was prepared to do it for nothing, along with Hermer and so on. So he wanted to do this. He didn't do anything for nothing unless he wanted to do it. And working for a man, or with a man like Phil Shiner. Now, we've already seen this week that Starmer's judgment of character and due diligence of people he works with is at best flawed. And he gets into bed with these people. They take millions and millions of public money. They work on 200 cases, none of which pass the test in the proper courts of law. Money is poured down the drain. People's lives are ruined. And did Starmer really care? No. But having been there at the time and seeing the woeful state of British forces in southern Iraq as the government basically lost the will to do anything, one has to wonder what the ulterior motives were. Not only were they sort of under-resourced and restricted from doing sensible operations, there were lawyers running around trying to nail them for doing stuff that they were doing in the interests of maintaining law and order and so on. So I think there's a lot of that. The fact that Starmer, for instance, on Sergeant Cattrall, he went for him twice. Once wasn't good enough. He went for him twice. And so that kind of says something about the whole thing, I think. And he didn't care about the effect on this man who has been proved not guilty, innocent, call it what you like, several times. He just didn't care about what he did to him. And I think that's pretty poor, frankly.
The article in the Express honed in on the argument of betrayal versus his service rhetoric. Would you agree with that?
Words are cheap. Politicians trot them out all the time. They're the currency of the business. We all understand that. But when somebody stands at the dispatch box or puts on the kit, if it's not a hard hat somewhere in a declining industry in the north of Britain, then, let's put the camouflage kit on and stand with some of the troops and so on. All politicians do that. Margaret Thatcher did it. Tony Blair loved doing it, and off he sent the soldiers, and then in came the lawyers. I think there is a total and utter disconnect between what people are saying, and that's not just what the Prime Minister's saying, and the Healy and Carnes and all those people. We love you, we want more soldiers, we want to look after you, and all that sort of stuff, which is shown by events to be untrue, or at least to be of second order to their broader political dogma and considerations. So, yes, the act that they are pushing through, the whole ECHR trying to replace the law of armed conflict, which is fit for purpose and has been used around the world and makes a lot of sense and is pretty easy to train into soldiers. Every soldier's properly trained in it by some, fairly subjective nonsense from Strasbourg that's not really designed for conflict. It's designed for all sorts of other things. Battlefields aren't football grounds or shopping malls. And so what we have is a political class now that wants to portray itself as being with the troops because that's good politically. But actually, ideologically, they are preferring to deal in obstructions like ECHR instead of the law of armed conflict, which everyone understands across the world, and the sovereignty of Parliament to decide what the rules of engagement and any other legal controls need to be put into place to justify the will of the British people on whose behalf Tommy Atkins is being sent into harm's way. And so there's that huge dilemma, and they don't seem to be even remotely interested in addressing it. Al Carnes said on the 18th of November, the ECHR is non-negotiable. Well, I think that's wrong, because I don't think the ECHR is fit for purpose in this context.
So what is it the veterans want?
I think the veterans want a fair crack of the whip. And they do want some better form of control over vexatious prosecutions, which is what Johnny Mercer, because this would be going on. Johnny Mercer didn't wake up one morning and say, I think I'll put a Legacy Act together for Northern Ireland. It was a festering sore for decades that needed addressing. And, fair play to Johnny, he actually went and addressed it and brought in what he did. And I know it took a lot of, guts and emotional effort to get it there, but he did. And I think it was a very well thought out and carefully prepared bill and then an act. And that didn't give veterans total immunity or absolution or anything like that at all. And anybody who says that it did is being disingenuous. But what veterans feel, and I'm one of them, and I agree, is that this is a two-tier approach. I know we hear it a lot, but it is. The IRA kept no records. They don't tell the truth, probably never have done. A lot of things that might have existed will have been disappeared. A lot of people who might have been able to say something will have been disappeared. So the chances of getting any evidence together to reopen cases against, the people who did the vast majority of the killing, the slaughtering of thousands of people, are, frankly, thin. It's interesting. Remember, in 1992, I know it's a long time ago, but I was just down the road, they blew up the forensic science laboratories. They didn't blow it up because they didn't like the building. They blew it up to get rid of all that evidence. And so, plus, there were several grubby little deals in the Good Friday Agreement about admissiveness of evidence that had been taken forensically from weapons and this, that, and the other. And none of the weapons put beyond use could be checked for fingerprints or residue or test fire to see where their bullets had actually, which bodies their bullets had ended up in and so on. So all that was done to pander to the IRA. So that was that. If you're a soldier, all the stuff that you did is recorded minutely. So there is stacks and stacks of evidence that is there to tell you exactly what the army did and absolutely nothing to tell you to prove what the IRA did. And it then becomes one person's word against another 50 years on. That's not going to work. And so the feeling is that the playing field is incredibly badly tilted. And then when you have people coming in like the Sinn Féin lady saying, everyone's equal. No, they're not. It's like saying that, the Cray twins are equal to the superintendent in Scotland Yard. It's just nonsense. And it should be viewed as that. And that's even before we bring in the Republic of Ireland. So what the veterans want is what they believe in, is what they stood up for, is what they fought for, and that is justice. That's all. Forget about law, forget about process and lawyers and open checkbooks. They just want justice. And what this government is doing is conniving against that.
But this government would say that they're also providing protections.
They are. Protections that exist for anybody in the United Kingdom, including potential terrorists. There's no real protections. The 6 protections that they've put through are available to anybody, frankly. So they're not providing anything special at all. They're pretending it's special, but it's not. It's a bit of a con job, and it's not a very clever one.
So what protections should MPs be prioritising?
I think people should not throw the whole Legacy Act out for a start. There's no need for it. If you think you can sort of tighten it up, tweak it, or improve bits of it, then fair enough. But it's not fundamentally flawed and never was. But this was a manifesto commitment by the incoming government, and we must ask why. And people have been doing a lot of thinking about this, because behind all the political rhetoric, behind all the veterans in the Labour Party saying, we've got you back, and then voting against you. And then after the most recent one, a couple of weeks ago, then scurrying up to the gallery to say, I didn't really mean it, we've got you back. Well, no, you haven't, mate. You voted against us, so please just go away. So I think they realise that this is becoming something that is starting to smell. And why is it starting to, what's it for? And I think there's an ideological group in the Labour Party who are either believe in a united Ireland or are very close to the idea of Ireland and this, that and the other, and would like to see all that happen. And therefore, to do that, you have got to get into bed and closer with the Republic of Ireland. To do that, you've got to sell down the river the loyalist unionist community in Northern Ireland who don't want to be part of the Republic of Ireland, which is why you had a separate province of Ulster within the United Kingdom in the first place. And so the ulterior motive being, let's deliver Republic of Ireland, won't we look great on the international stage? Well, maybe not. Maybe once things start getting a bit tasty because people feel that they've been let down and they feel the IRA have won, they hate the IRA for what they did to them, and things start to get a bit naughty, then that's going to be interesting. I'd love to see how the Irish Army and the Gardaí could deal with some of the hardcore people on the unionist side who will not want to do that. And I think it would be a rerun of the Curragh Mutiny of 1911, I think, if someone said, well, before the Brits leave Ulster, can they purge it of unionists? So why? I think it's all about that ideological link to the Republic of Ireland, being nice people, getting in closer to Europe, the Irish being nice to us and so on. But frankly, that is not going to deliver a just and lasting peace, because the festering wounds will still be there. And this is rubbing salt into them. The joke of Simon Harris standing up and saying, oh, well, of course, we'll now help investigate things that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. Well, look, mate, you could have investigated them 20, 30, 40 years ago, but you didn't. And in some cases, you were obstructive and you knew what was going on and you did nothing to stop it. And a hell of a lot of people, particularly women and children, both on the mainland and in things like Enniskillen and Omagh, were killed by operations prepared, resourced and mounted from the Irish Republic. All the Semtex that came from Gaddafi. And remember, they knew what Gaddafi was like. He blew that aircraft up over Lockerbie. Everyone knew what Gaddafi's up to. But they were quite happy for the Semtex to come in, for the boyos in the north, and then either to go into the north or to go into blowing people up in Warrington, Manchester, or whatever. I think they really have to be sort of held to account on this. They can't be given a free pass to investigate themselves as the major facilitator of all the IRA's killing and terror. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And the other thing I think that needs to be done now is, if you want to level this playing field and get it a less two-tier, is you must look again at the pardons, the comfort letters, the prison releases, the amnesties, because frankly, if we're going to go back to 1998, then arguably those people should go back to prison, because they were let out, given a maximum 2-year sentence for murder, because that was the price of peace. And yet now we're trying to get something a little bit more across the board, and that was Johnny's aim with the Legacy Act. Then, that's not good enough. No. Well, they want it both ways. They can't have it both ways. We come back to people's feeling of natural justice, and this ain't right.
So how can veterans fight back? How can they push back against?
I think it's got to be themselves, be thoughtful, and look at how best in their particular context they can get the message over. It's not about making a fuss and screaming and shouting and so and so. Yes, there'll be occasions when people get on parade and show themselves where they need to show themselves. But there's other things that can be done. There's getting into local media. There's getting into local politics. There's getting into your local MP. There's a lot of areas in the Red Wall with a lot of, good working class families who had sons, husbands, dads, granddads in the army, and they're incredibly proud of them. And, the way people are treating veterans isn't going to go down very well. It would help if veterans made their point to their elected representatives that, are you with us? And if not, why are you not with us? Why are you against us? Please, can we come and talk to you and explain where we stand? Because you probably don't understand the depth of feeling, but there is one. And really to get, veterans talking to each other on all the various media, whether it's associations, informal groups or whatever. But, this is no top-down led campaign. There's a fantastic group of people who do not need total control and coordination and control freaks around it. Far from it. They're smart enough. They've got skin in the game. They know what to say. If they need some support, then the Justice for Veterans website gives them all the material they need. Then, guys, just go on, have your 5 minutes, come over sensibly, logically, and then turn to the right, gain height, march out, job done.
You have been listening to the One More Mission podcast. For more information, visit www.justiceforveterans.uk.